Why I never go upstairs alone. When I was 6 years old, my parents were trying to sell our home in Oregon to move back down to California. They decided that me and my mom would temporarily move to my grandmother's house while my dad would stay up in Oregon for a while. My grandmother lived in the Bay Area, which was where I grew up, so it was quite familiar territory for me. The outside of the home was beautiful. It had a perfect lawn, and the home itself had a brick base. The main color besides that was a darkish green, which matched the natural vibe that the builders were trying to portray. The furniture in the home had been passed down for a few generations. Some of it had been replaced due to wear and tear, but for the most part it was all older stuff. Most of the furniture had an old, almost faded green color, which with the red carpet kind of gave a Christmassy vibe. The only real issue was that the whole place always smelled like smoke because of my grandmother's cigarette addiction. You could see at least a few ash burns in each room on the carpet and furniture due to this. It kind of gave the home an even older vibe. Everyone slept downstairs while the upstairs was mainly used as a storage area. This was mainly due to the fact that my grandmother's health had been deteriorating for quite some time, and it was hard for her to move up and downstairs anymore. She was an old and tired widow that had been through 3 marriages. It was fine when she was younger because she was a mother of 7, and each child needed a place to sleep. That upstairs space was just as big as the downstairs. It had several rooms, all that were neatly decorated with nice furniture and classic paintings. The first time that I went up there, I just kinda looked down the hall, but went no further. My mom was downstairs with my grandmother, and I went exploring around the house. I got a creepy vibe as soon as I climbed the stairs. I really cannot explain it even to this day, but something in the back of my mind was telling me that I shouldn't go any further. As I made it to the top, I just kind of stood there as the feeling got worse. The hall had an almost malevolent vibe. My heart was suddenly pounding. I decided to take a few more steps down the hall before I turned around and bolted back down the stairs to the kitchen, where everyone was talking. The feeling just got too overwhelming. Later that night, I told my mom that it was scary upstairs. She laughed and told me that she was scared of it too, and that she always thought that it was haunted up there. We laughed it off, and I ended up thinking about other things before finally going to sleep. The next weekend, my dad came to visit. My grandmother decided to take advantage of the situation and asked him if he could go upstairs to grab some old boxes that she hadn't gone through in over a decade. He told her he would grab them after lunch that day. I panicked a bit. During lunch, I told my dad that I thought it was haunted up there and that he shouldn't go. He smiled at me and told me that it was not, and that I should go up there with him. He was insistent that everything would be okay. I reluctantly agreed and decided I would give it another go. If anything happened, I knew that Dad would save me. That afternoon, we went up there together, and he was right. Everything was fine. I followed him around as he grabbed the boxes. I even helped carry things down with him. Not once did I get any sort of fear or strange feelings. He was right, and I was just a scared child. All that it had meant was that I had a fear of being alone. By the end, we went downstairs and began to unpack the boxes. I felt slightly embarrassed at that point. There was absolutely nothing to be afraid of. I was just a funny little kid with a wild imagination. As we unpacked the boxes, we came across all kinds of old family pictures. I got to see pictures of my grandfather for the first time. My mom was only 6 when he died. I could not begin to imagine what that must have been like for her, especially since that was my age at the time. All of the photos were full of happy images of my relatives having fun. From birthday parties to graduations, they had it all. Then I came across a picture that I found very odd. It was a portrait much larger than any of the pictures I had seen yet. It was in very early shot, probably from the late 1800s. The whole thing had that old, faded, almost eerie look about it. It was an old family portrait. It was of a mother and father with 5 kids. All were standing. The children stood in front and the parents in the back. The father was clearly taller than everyone else, and not just by a little. Even though the painting was dim, I could tell that all of the family members were dressed in dark colors, most likely black. It was as if they had just come from a funeral. All of them had serious faces, almost angry. I had seen pictures similar to this one before in local antique shops, but there was something unusual about this picture that stood out like a sore thumb. The entire family had completely whited out eyes. I mean, they were as white as a sheet of fresh paper. It was so creepy that I instantly got a chill up my spine. My parents were still going through other boxes when I turned to my mom and showed her the picture. She went from smiling to frowning and creeped out, looking. She did not recognize the picture. My dad even looked a bit perturbed, which was new for me because nothing ever seemed to creep him out. We went into the other room where my grandmother was sitting and showed her the thing. As she put out her cigarette in the ashtray next to her, she grabbed the picture and stared at it for what seemed to be several minutes. Then my mom asked if she knew who these people were. She responded by saying that she didn't recognize the picture or the people in it at all. She sat it down on the table next to her and lit up another smoke. The way she lit it was in a more intense fashion than I had even seen her do before. For the rest of the weekend, me and my mom had a running joke about the creepy image that I found. She called the family the ancestors. I quickly picked up on it and we would laugh about it here and there. She would joke that the photo was cursed and that it would probably cause her to get deathly sick if we stayed around it long enough. That was only part of my mother's sarcasm, even if it was a bit dark. The following week, my dad left to go back to Oregon while we continued to stay at the house. My main activity was drawing stick figures that week. My drawings were mostly images of action heroes and villains battling. I used so much paper that we began to run low and I was no longer allowed to draw on anything. I had already gone through all the coloring books and I was in search for something to draw on. I would take anything. One of those days, while my mom was out shopping and my grandmother was cooking in the kitchen, I found myself alone in the living room with nothing to do. I looked around for something to draw on, but there was still nothing. Then I spotted that creepy old photo sitting in the exact same spot where my grandma had left it on the weekend. Then I got an idea. My creative streak went wild. I grabbed the picture and turned it over onto the floor and began to draw in pencil. The back was all white, perfect for drawing. I drew 2 stick figures. One was shooting the other. I used lines as bullets as they hit the other figure in the head. I found it funny. Sometimes as children, we don't know why we draw certain things or what drives us to do so. For me, I was just happy to be drawing. After I was done, I turned it over and put it right back in its place and sat down. I really wasn't doing anything wrong since no one seemed to care about the picture much anyway. Everything was going quite well. My 7th birthday finally came and I got all kinds of new coloring books and toys. I got to go swimming the next day, and when we returned, I played in the back next to the garden while my mom and grandmother chatted. After a while, I got bored and went inside alone. Suddenly, I got an odd urge to go upstairs. I wanted to prove to myself that I could go up there alone and not be scared. I mean, my dad wasn't afraid, and he went up there alone, so I decided I would. I quietly crept up the staircase and into the hall. As soon as I stepped foot from the stairs onto the floor, I stopped. I was frightened. I felt that menacing presence once more, but this time it seemed even worse. In fact, it was much worse. I wanted to turn back around and go down the stairs, but part of me didn't want to chicken out. I wanted to be a big boy. I needed some adventure in my life. 5 minutes, I thought to myself as I looked down the hall. There was a closed door directly across the hallway on the other end. I was kind of far away, but I knew I could make it. Just 5 minutes in that room, I kept telling myself. As I continued, I tiptoed each step of the way as if I was trying not to get caught. With each step, my heart grew heavier and more weary. I began to sweat. Then I was there. I was right in front of the door. Creak, creak, creak. I heard a sound coming from the other side. It was like someone was rocking a baby's crib. I stepped forward to put my head to the door. As I did, the floor creaked from under my foot, and suddenly, the sound stopped. I was petrified. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I became paralyzed with fear. Wait, I was a big boy, not a coward. I could do it. I talked myself through it. I knew that if I turned back now, I would be some sort of wimp. I wiped my forehead and slowly opened the door. As I looked in, I could see that the room was set up for a child. The walls were covered in a baby blue wallpaper and sunlight gleamed through the curtains. It was quite peaceful, actually. I noticed a rocking horse by the window. The wind must have been making it move. That was what I was hearing. I was safe. Nothing was there to get me. Then I quickly walked toward the center of the room and stood in place. I began counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I stopped. I saw something horrifying. When I had walked in, I noticed a chair at the far corner of the room, and at the time it was completely empty. But now there was a man sitting there staring directly at me. He was wearing all black and he sat still as a statue. At first I thought it might be my uncle. He had been homeless for quite some time and was known to sneak in and stay the night from time to time. But no, this was someone else. Someone that looked far different from him. Then that same feeling from before erupted through my veins. That feeling of complete dread. It was back. Only this time it was amplified by about 20 million. We made eye contact. His eyes, they were completely white. No pupils could be seen. It was like staring into the eyes of nothingness. After a few seconds of examining this, I impulsively took a step back. As I did, he stood. He was tall as hell. The rocking horse began rocking, but at an abnormal speed. It was going at really fast. A grandmother clock in the corner began to go off. It was very loud. Without thinking, I turned and ran straight out the door. As I got halfway down the hall, the door slammed behind me. I practically jumped down the stairs. I was so scared. I decided not to tell anyone about my trip up there. It was too frightening. My mom started a fire in the fireplace that night. When no one else was in the room, I decided to burn the picture of the ancestors. I watched it the whole way through until it was nothing but a crisp. That man I had seen upstairs, it was the same man in that picture. He was haunting the upstairs of the home. That's why it felt so evil up there. I didn't know who he was or where that picture came from. It was time to say goodbye. I hoped that by burning the photo that maybe his spirit would leave. I knew that it was just a hope and probably not reality, but I had to at least try. It was the only thing that I could think to try. When we finally moved, I was ecstatic. I never climbed those stairs again. Never. 9 years later, when I was 15 years old, my grandmother passed away. She had sold the home about a year before, and all of her stuff was put into storage. After the funeral, which came the following week, me and my family were given a few boxes of her old stuff to go through. When we got to the pictures, my family and I sat down and enjoyed some cold lemonade and reminisced. The night was very pleasant. It was nice to see my grandmother and other close relatives happy again, even if they were just frozen in pictures. When I got to the bottom of the last box, I got a strange déjà vu. I pulled out a large picture. It was the portrait of the ancestors. Wow, A copy of that old picture that I burned all those years ago, I thought to myself. Then all those bad memories filled my mind. Haunting memories. Memories that had escaped my mind for many years. Suddenly they were back. I sat the picture down to go get more lemonade. When I came back, I went to go grab the picture to show my mom. I figured we could get a laugh or two in and make a few ancestor jokes, and it would all be over. But when I got back from the kitchen, I was spooked. I stood there paralyzed like I was when I saw that man sitting in that old chair. My mouth was hanging open in astonishment. I realized that I had laid the picture face down. On the back was 2 stick figures, the same stick figures I had drawn 8 earlier. My wife and I can hear ourselves upstairs. The tires crunched over snow as we rounded the final bend, the cabin coming into view just as the sun dipped behind the mountains. It looked exactly like the pictures. Quaint, tucked into the trees that picturesquely hid a roof that needed replacing. The kind of place someone more optimistic might describe as charming. I wanted it to feel charming. I wanted Claire to see it that way too. "Here we are," I said, forcing a little enthusiasm into my voice as I pulled into the narrow driveway. Claire didn't respond. She was staring at her phone, thumb scrolling slowly, her face bathed in the faint blue glow. "Looks nice, doesn't it?" I tried again, louder this time. She glanced up, eyes flicking to the cabin, then back to her screen. "It's fine," she murmured. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Fine. Of course it was fine. That's how everything was with us these days. Just fine. The wind picked up as I stepped out of the car, sharp and bitter against my face. The sky hung low and heavy, the snow swirling in lazy drifts that would soon grow into something heavier. I turned, taking in my surroundings. The cabin sat perched on the mountainside, the winding road we'd taken visible below, snaking through the trees like a thin, fragile thread. The road had split and veered back toward town a quarter-mile before, leaving only a slick, cobbled driveway behind. For the first time in months, there was no sound of traffic, no hum of engines or distant voices, just the wind growing louder by the second and the soft, eerie hush of falling snow. The kind of quiet that presses in on you, suffocating until you're not sure whether it's the world holding its breath or you. I looked back at Claire, still sitting in the passenger seat. She'd finally looked up from her phone and seemed to really be taking in the cabin. For a second, I was hopeful that she was excited to be here, but I quickly realized her face was washed with a vague disdain for the building. "Can you grab your bags?" I asked, leaning back in the door. She sighed a little too loudly and climbed out, shivering as she zipped her coat and put her phone in her pocket. "It's freezing." "It's December in Colorado," I said, trying for humor. "What did you expect?" She didn't laugh. The cabin door resisted when I pushed it open, the wood swollen and warped from years of wear and weather. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine and something musty, the dull, damp scent reminding me of our little apartment back home. The floors groaned underfoot as I stepped in, the sound muffled by faded rugs and soft wood. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, and a small kitchen sat off to the left, its appliances outdated but at least appearing functional. To our right, a narrow hallway with 2 doors and a pull-down attic string seemed to be the way to our bathroom and bedroom. Generic framed paintings and kitschy souvenirs adorned the hall, gathering dust. Telltale signs of a home that had been long delegated to live out its days as a holiday rental. "It's cozy," I said, setting our bags down by the door. Claire brushed past me without a word, heading straight for the couch. She dropped onto it, pulling her phone out again and scrolling as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. At least she looked comfortable to finally be out of the car. I sighed, my breath puffing out in the chilly air as I set our bags down. "I'll get the fire going." The fireplace was old, caked in soot, and looked like it probably hadn't passed an inspection in decades. But there was a neat stack of logs and kindling waiting beside it. I knelt down, striking a few damp matches until one finally lit, and coaxed a flame to life. Warmth crept into the room as the fire caught, long shadows dancing across the wooden walls. "Better?" I asked, glancing at Claire. She looked up and flashed me a curt smile and nod before burying herself again in her phone. I found myself soured at the realization that her signal here must somehow be decent enough to keep endlessly scrolling. I busied myself unpacking, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing minute. The snow had started falling harder now, the wind rattling the windows. The cabin groaned softly, the sound deep and patient, like a long-held sigh. I paused, listening, but it was just the home shifting under the slowly increasing burden of the snow on the roof. "At least this place has some character," I said, trying to break the silence. Claire didn't respond. I sat down next to her, rubbing my hands together as I tried to ignore the vague dampness of the couch. "Look, Claire, I know this trip isn't exactly your idea of relaxing, but I thought—" "I'm tired," she cut in, standing abruptly. "I'm going to bed." "Claire!" She was already walking down the hall, her footsteps sharp against the creaky floorboards. A door shut and I was left alone with the fire and the sound of the growing storm outside. I leaned back, staring at the dancing flames. I pulled a blanket out of one of my bags and was relieved to find that the couch reclined. "Maybe it would be best if you slept on the couch tonight." Claire's words from days prior rattled through my head. It hadn't just been that night. We hadn't slept in the same room since. I had hoped that would change tonight, but I resigned myself to fall asleep by the crackling fire. The cabin let out another low groan, the sound making the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I looked out the window once more and realized that the growing storm had become a blizzard. Cold air blew in through the crack under the front door, and I could tell my car wasn't moving anytime soon. It was going to be a long night. Morning crept in slowly, the storm outside reduced to a dull whisper of snow against the windows. The fire had died overnight, leaving the cabin bitterly cold. I dragged myself off the couch and pulled on a sweatshirt, shivering as I walked into the kitchen. Claire was already up, sitting at the small table by the window, her coffee mug sitting in front of her on the table untouched. She wasn't looking at her phone, which felt like progress, but her eyes were fixed on the snow-covered trees outside. Her head was tilted towards the hallway as though she were listening for me coming. "Morning," I said, grabbing the remaining chipped mug from the counter. "Morning," she replied quietly, not turning to look at me. I poured myself some coffee, the pot nearly cold since she'd made it. She must have been up for hours. "The storm looks like it's easing up," I said, leaning against the counter. "Maybe we could take a walk later, get some fresh air." She made a vague noise of hesitant agreement, but her body language was closed off, legs tucked under her, shoulders hunched. It wasn't outright hostility, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. I watched her for a moment, my coffee growing colder in my hands. I couldn't stop myself from thinking about the things she'd said to me during our last fight, words that had settled into me like splinters. "If you want to book that stupid anniversary trip, go right ahead. You just bulldoze ahead like what you want is the only thing that matters." I watched myself furrow my brow and then put my head in my hand. "Claire, I'm trying here, I really am, but I can never get through to you, can I? First, it was you passing on the job offer when we needed that money. Then it was that thing with your ex. I told you, nothing happened, Jason. He just stopped by for coffee is all." "Claire, I'm not stupid. You turned off the cameras, but the audio was still recording, you idiot." Don't you dare call me an idiot after all I've done for you. I watched as Claire had stormed towards me, and our fight was about to escalate. She pounced at me, but I threw her off of me towards the kitchen. I watched her crack her head on the edge of the table and fall through it. I walked up to the table slowly. I observed her breathing grow shallow as she lay spasming on the floor. I watched her breathing stop as blood slowly pooled around her. I watched myself stand up calmly, then walk into our bedroom. A minute later, I left, quietly wheeling our luggage towards the front door and leaving as my wife lay motionless. Then, as if sensing its audience had seen enough, the laptop's battery icon flashed once, critical, and the screen went black. The sudden death of the device plunged me back into silence and darkness, a quiet so deep it was almost suffocating. The absence of the voices, which had been such a constant and invasive presence, now left a shallow emptiness that was somehow worse than the noise. I sat for a moment, unable to process what I'd just seen. I turned my flashlight up towards Claire, only to see that I was now alone in the room, the dull smell of iron growing ever stronger from the kitchen. I shakily turned my flashlight again, this time towards the kitchen table, shrouded in a cloak of darkness that I hadn't dared breach since I ascended the attic ladder. There, lying crumpled in a heap of splintered wood, lay my wife. Dried blood had pooled around her head, and I winced at noticing that her neck was bent at an unnatural angle. She had begun to bloat and stiffen, and the closer I stepped, the more the iron scent of blood was replaced with a musky, rotted smell. She was almost entirely a corpse, save for her eyes. Fresh and watery, they were locked onto me, silently accusing me. "Claire?" I whispered, praying with every fiber that somehow she was still in there. But she didn't respond, didn't move. She lay frozen, staring intently, eyes following me as I nervously swayed. The air around us grew colder, denser, as if the room itself was closing in, feeding off the rising panic. Then, almost imperceptibly, Claire began to whisper. The words were soft, disjointed murmurs at first, guttural sounds forcing their way out of a broken, bloated throat. As I drew closer, the whispers grew clearer, sharper. They were not the comforting words I yearned for, but a continuation of the cascade of cruel, cutting phrases I'd grown accustomed to. "You never really cared, did you, Jason? It was always about you, your needs." Her voice was a ghost, devoid even of its usual disdain, hollow and haunting. I stood, frozen, as her whispers intensified, layering upon each other in a relentless, cold assault. "You're so selfish. You think you're the victim, always playing the martyr." Each word sliced through the already frigid air. The whispers swelled into a torrent of accusations. "You suffocate me, Jason. I can't breathe with you, can't grow. You're a dead weight, dragging me down into your misery." I stumbled backward, hands clamped over my ears, but it was futile. "Stop it, Claire. Please get up. This isn't okay. Please get up. You should have known I was too good for you. I wasted the best years of my life on a fantasy that you'd change." Her face so familiar and yet so warped, contorted as her dead lips struggled to keep up with the verbal onslaught. The storm outside seemed to echo her fury, the wind howling against the walls as if in sympathy with her rage. Overwhelmed and unable to bear it, I dropped to my knees, the cold of the floor seeping into my bones. Claire's figure, crumpled across from mine, began to crunch as her frame contorted itself so she could continue to lock eyes with me. Her expression was blank, but her eyes piecing as she continued her litany of grievances. I crawled, sobbing, searching in the dark for the attic door that led me here, but it had long vanished. The floor was solid. As the roar of the frozen world outside began to muffle, snow piling against our artificial windows, her voice was the only sound, a relentless echo in the ghostly replica of our apartment. Her words didn't stop for hours, and by the time she began to quiet, She had managed to stand up and loom over me, cold and pale, whispering accusations and curses at me in the dark. It has been weeks since the door to the outside vanished, leaving me trapped in my own home with the whispering thing that was once my wife. Claire, or the thing that used to be her, grows more gaunt by the day, her features sharpening, her eyes sinking deeper into her skull. She's starting to smell worse, but she keeps whispering. She isn't going to harm me, not physically. She can't. Her body, crumbling and decaying, only has the energy to torment me with its gaze and with its words. I've tried the front door, but I don't think it's any more than decoration in this mockery of my home. It doesn't lead outside, it doesn't even open. It's just part of the wall. The storm outside has not abated. I can hear it sometimes through the thick snow that covers my windows. If the snow ever subsides, the windows may be my only chance at escape. I'm typing this now as both a record and a plea. If you're reading this, if this somehow finds its way to someone, anyone, do you know when the blizzard near Denver will let up? Is there any forecast about when the snow will start to melt? It's cold in here, and I don't think I can listen to her for much longer. The story of my upstairs neighbors from hell. I have to tell the story of my upstairs neighbors from hell. I recently moved into my dream apartment. I knew it was everything I had ever wanted in a flat the moment I walked in the door at the viewing. It was not too expensive, so I put in an offer. After a few nail-biting days, I received the phone call. The place was mine. I was warned that the place was not very quiet, but I have never been a light sleeper, so that did not deter me at all. I was overjoyed at the prospect of living in my dream home. I packed up my whole life into boxes. I went to IKEA to pick out furniture. No less than 3 trips, to be accurate. I spent way too much money, especially on things I did not really need, things that just added that little extra to the place. I was in love with that flat, and people do crazy things when they are in love. That first night, after the movers brought my furniture and IKEA had dropped off all my new stuff, I just sat on the couch and took in the fruits of my labor. I had never been happier with a flat in my life, and after years of weird flatmates and other people's hair in my shower, I felt like I deserved this. My own little palace. And then it started. The upstairs neighbors. Just them walking around sounded like a herd of wildebeest fleeing a lion. I knew a couple lived there. It baffled me how it was possible for 2 people to make that much noise. It bothered me, to be sure, but I was not too worried. Like I said, I am not a light sleeper, and they had to go to bed at some point too, right? Wrong. After a few weeks in that place, it became painfully obvious that these people never slept. Not only did they never sleep, they would spend every night rearranging furniture or something. I would lay awake in bed, trying to picture what they could possibly be doing to be making so much noise. It sounded like there were more than just 2 people up there. It sounded like there was a whole damn battalion of little drummer boys. And then the yelling started. I guess they were not getting along very well. If they were speaking a language I understood, I bet you I would have been able to hear every single insult they hurled at each other. The tone they used needed no translation. It sounded like they were going to rip each other's heads off any minute. A part of me wished they would, so I would have some peace and quiet. I started sleeping with earplugs, but then there were the thuds. A few times a week, around 2 a.m., something heavy would drop on the floor upstairs. I could have sworn it made my whole bed shake. It would certainly wake me up. I would lay awake in bed, throwing curses at the ceiling, like that would help. I could lay there for hours, listening to someone trying to quietly walk around up there. "Why bother?" I would yell in my head. "You already woke up the whole damn house with your thudding." Other nights there would be more yelling, door slamming, and I would hear heavy boots stomp down the stairs. Hours later, heavy boots would stomp back up the stairs and then get into bed. Occasionally, there would be loud music. Euro trash with a heavy bass, There would be more yelling, but the happy kind. I would hear heavy boot stomping that could be dancing and such. It was pretty clear that these people were drinkers, possibly of the barely functioning alcoholic type. That was the picture I was creating in my mind, at least. And don't even get me started about the sex. Or actually get me started about the sex. I have always suspected that some people have to sound like porn stars in bed. Why else would porn stars sound that way? But I had never heard it live before. But this couple? Oh man, they sounded like scores of monkeys screeching in unison. And then it was their bed. I would have sworn they had placed it against the wall on purpose, just for maximum sound effects. I started wondering whether the wall would collapse from the repeated trauma. Maybe they would take down the whole building one night. I might be a little bit bitter due to my own sexless existence, but that was not normal sex. That was crazy demon sex, I'm telling you. Well, to be quite honest, I might be embellishing a little bit here, but still, there was just so much noise. From the first day, I knew deep down that I had to do something eventually. My perfect apartment was turning into my perfect hell. I dreaded going home. I dreaded trying to sleep. Now I am very conflict-shy and non-confrontational, so during the day I would manage to convince myself that it was all fine, and that I did not really need to intervene. It worked for a while. As we all know, denial can only take you so far, and eventually I came to hate these people more than I have ever hated anyone. I never even met them. I just knew I hated them. I mean, I did not really hate them. I just hated them like you hate that one annoying guy in class, or you hate the guy who listens to music on his shitty speakers on the bus, or the guy who cuts in line at the store. Finally, I realized I could not live like this anymore. I needed to overcome my fears, face my demons, and deal with the situation. It took me a while to come up with a good plan. I mean, I did not want to antagonize them. If they came to think of me as the crazy, annoying downstairs neighbor, they would never be quiet. I needed to be charming, disarming, and very, very nice. Finally, I came up with a perfect plan. Let's just say it involved a reasonably priced bottle of whiskey and a friendly, neighborly smile. It took me a while to work up the nerve, but finally I did it. I faced my fears. I went up there and dealt with the problem. It really did get a lot better. A few days ago, the police came to my door, asked me if I knew anything about the upstairs neighbors. I told them the truth. I knew next to nothing about them. They asked me if there had been any suspicious activity in the building recently. No. Again, why? Had I heard anything strange lately? Strange? Like what? No, nothing strange. Well, hun, it seems that your upstairs neighbors had some serious relationship problems. I heard some completely new noises coming from upstairs, and then I heard 2 pairs of heavy boots coming down the stairs. Suddenly, a stretcher with a body bag came into my view. I gasped loudly. Wait, did something happen to them? I asked, the shock clearly visible on my face. It's been quiet up there lately. I thought they were on a vacation or something. I'm so sorry you had to see that, hun. He tried reassuringly. We're not quite sure what happened yet. Nothing for you to worry your pretty little head about. It looks pretty cut and dry. We're thinking they got drunk, got into a fight, you know. It seems he took her out, then ended himself. He sighed. It's always the boyfriend in these cases, you know. Always the boyfriend, he added, shaking his head. My eyes widened in fear. They're both dead? But what? How? I don't understand. I'm afraid I've already disclosed too many details about the case. He sighed. But I don't want you to be scared. It was obviously a domestic issue. I know it's a bit gruesome, but it's not like there's a serial killer on the loose or something. As long as you don't believe in ghosts, it's nothing to be afraid of here. He laughed. I didn't. And that is the last I heard of the upstairs neighbors from hell. So why am I writing this story? Well, I guess I just want someone to know. They say it's always the boyfriend, except sometimes it isn't. And frankly, when I saw those two stretchers getting carried down the stairs, when I carefully contorted my face into a mask of worry, when the police questioned me about any suspicious activity in the building, when the death was ruled murder/suicide, when the case was closed, I realized getting away with murder felt damned good. I might just do this again.